I will talk about left coronary engagement, particularly focus on radial access with general tips as well. So I have provided such talks in the past, and I suggest you review those under my YouTube channel, cardiac catheterization playlist, particularly those 3 talks I highlighted here, especially that one from a year ago or so, left coronary engagement. So in each of those talks, I try to change cases, update illustrations, so you can have a library of illustrations, and all of the talks remain relevant for you to review and get some experience. Today, I will show some slides and idea that I have shown before. Some of them I have shown before for the new and starting fellows, but I will add new cases and updates, and I will fine-tune illustrations and technique to keep it relevant. For example, I will be talking about guiding catheter engagement for the higher level fellows. So I will start with this basic. The most basic catheter we use is the Jutkins catheter, whether femoral or radial. And this is the design of the Jutkins catheter. It has a primary tip here and a secondary tip, which sits on the opposite aortic wall, if the aorta is small. The distance between this and that is what we call the length of the catheter or the arm of the catheter. And it is what is measured in centimeter. And it is what dictates the name JL3, 4, or 5. It's the distance in centimeter between this and that, okay? This is the Jutkins right catheter meant to engage the right coronary. It's a different shape, more elongated. And again, it has a primary and a soft secondary curve. And again, the distance between those two is the length of the catheter. Unlike Jutkins left, where we frequently vary our length of catheter between 3 to 6 centimeters, depending on radial versus femoral and the shape of the aorta, for Jutkins right, we almost always use Jutkins right 4. I will elaborate on the Amplatz catheter later on. So how is the catheter length and the catheter configuration vary between femoral access and radial access? And I will illustrate that here. This is a Jutkins left 4 used to engage the left coronary in a particular patient, and this is the same Jutkins left 4 in the same patient from a right radial. Note that this Jutkins left 4 is not able to engage the coronary in that same patient from a radial access. The idea I want you to recognize here is that a right radial access and even left radial to a lesser degree elongate catheters and make them point down. So because of that bend here at the innominate, the catheter is spread out and elongated, which makes it points down compared to coming from a femoral access. For that reason, Jutkins left 4 will end up being too long for this patient. In general, whenever a catheter points down, in order to engage a coronary, you need a shorter arm, shorter length. That's why from a right radial for that same patient who needs JL4 from femoral, you need to get a JL3.5 from radial to point more up and to have a less elongated catheter. Okay, so that's one important tip to start with. Another important tip in general from any approach, femoral or radial, whenever you see a catheter straightened and elongated with its tip pointing down, you need a shorter arm to engage. Conversely, when you see a catheter falling down and shortened, looped on itself with its tip pointing up, you need a longer arm. And this is how I illustrated. This one is elongated with a tip pointing down below the coronary. You need to go smaller from JL4 to JL3.5, okay? This one, it's falling with its tip pointing up. You need to go bigger, JL5. You need a bigger arm to point that catheter tip more down and to prevent the catheter from falling and looping on itself, okay? That's a very important idea regardless of access. I mentioned left radial. Left radial may elongate the catheters a little less because it has a less sharp of a turn at the innominate level. But left radial also elongate catheter in my experience. And in my experience, left radial has similar caveat, and I tend to use a Jutkins left 3.5 from left radial as well, similarly to what I do with right radial. Another important tip and idea is compared to femoral, radial creates that additional sharp bend at the innominate aorta junction. And that's really what dictates the difficulty sometimes in radial engagement. How sharp is this bend? Okay, in some patients, it's a straight line. In some other patients, a very sharp bend. The sharper that bend, the more you lose support on the catheter, because simply the sharper that bend, the more the natural propensity for that catheter it is to get elongated and spring out into the aortic arch. So it's unnatural for that catheter to want to stay here. It wants to jump out and embrace its natural shape. So that twist here reduces the support of the catheter because that catheter is under tension, okay? Left radial may have an easier angle than right radial, but often it's almost the same in my experience. You do lose support with left radial as well, okay? The sharper that angle, compare this angle to that angle, the sharper that angle, the worse the radial axis is and the less supportive. Also, the shorter that aorta, the worse it is. The shorter the distance between the aortic arch and the sinuses, sharp and short. So I described the Jutkins left catheters. There are other catheters we can use radially, the Tiger and Jackie catheters, which are called specific radial catheters. Those catheters are somewhat similar to the Jutkins, except that secondary curve is more like a platform, okay, like a long platform, which allows the catheter to have a more stable positioning over the opposite aortic wall and more stable engagement. However, the downside of those Tiger and Jackie catheters is that their arm is 4 centimeters, whereas you generally frequently need a 3.5 centimeter from radial. So that's really their downside. I wish they made them in a 3.5 centimeters. Another difference, Tiger catheter has a tip that tends to point up, whereas a Jackie catheter has a tip that tends to point down. Just know those features. Now, I describe the Jutkins left from a right radial and describe how the right radial elongates left coronary catheters. However, interestingly, when the catheter is pointing toward the right coronary artery, the right radial actually shortens and loops and makes those catheter more upward pointing when aiming to the right coronary. So it's different. It's all about physics and anatomy. To the left coronary, the radial elongates catheter and makes you want a shorter length catheter. From wherever, however, when you're going to the right coronary artery, when you're looking into the convexity of the aorta, the catheter is no longer elongated. It tends to be looped and shortened and upward looking. That's why, for example, to engage the right coronary artery, we need a Jutkins right 4, not shorter than Jutkins right 4. So we use the same catheter size from femoral or radial. Even some books recommends Jutkins right 5, simply because to the right coronary, you're looped and shortened and more upward looking. But Jutkins right 4 is what I use almost always. So this is kind of a summary slide that I will go back to. So for diagnostic radial, we use a Jutkins left 3.5 or Tiger and Jackie for the left coronary, and we use Jutkins right 4 or Amplatz right for the right coronary. We use also Tiger and Jackie. So Tiger and Jackie can be used for both left and right coronary artery. From the femoral is Jutkins left 4 for the left and GR4 Amplatz right for the right coronary. So now I will start describing how to engage. After describing the anatomy, the configuration, and the catheter, I will describe how to engage. And there are two ideas first, anatomical idea to understand before describing catheter manipulation. The first one is you need to understand the coronary cusps. you need to always, as you're engaging, imagine that aorta and imagine in your brain the right cusp and the left cusp. So keep in mind this picture. The left cusp is the uppermost cusp, whereas the right and non-coronary cusp are the lowermost cusps. And your wire and devices from a right radial axis tend to naturally embrace and fall into those, the right or non-coronary cusp, the lowermost cusp, not the left cusp. You need to get it into the left cusp eventually, but they naturally fall here. Now, we work in abstract imaging, so, you know, you need to imagine that. As you're looking at this, you need to imagine this is right cusp, this is left cusp. And I have some picture where I draw it. You need to draw that in your mind like I drew it here. Right cusp, left cusp. You fall into the right cusp, you try to jump into the left cusp. So it's a very important anatomy here to understand. Another important hint is on an axial level. What view do we need to engage the right and the left coronary? This is an axial cut at the level of the sinuses of Valsalva. So it shows you why LAO, left anterior oblique, is the best view to engage the coronaries. In general, in angiography, whenever you want to display a structure well in angiography, you need to be orthogonal to that structure. You cannot be in line with it, okay? So LAO, left anterior oblique, is orthogonal to the ostia of the left coronary and right coronary. So it allows us to display those ostia well, and subsequently, it allows us to point the catheter well, left or right, so we know how to point the catheter as we're engaging. Whereas RAO, if we're trying to engage an RAO, we will have to make the catheter look at us or away from us. We will be in line with the catheter, and it will be very difficult manipulation. On occasion, I do use RAO to engage. RAO allows so LAO allows a good spread of left-right. RAO allows a good spread of anterior-posterior. So on occasion, when I have hard time engaging in LAO, I use RAO, and it will show me the anterior-posterior spread in cases, for example, where the coronary ostium is too anterior or too posterior, and it will help me point in that direction. This is particularly the case in difficult RCA, right coronary engagement, which usually in that case, in which case the RCA is usually very anterior here. And in that case, RAO will be orthogonal to the ostium of that anterior RCA. So on occasion, I use RAO in difficult engagement, but definitely 99% of the time, it's LAO. So now, after describing those two anatomical tips in an axial view and in a vertical view, now I will move on to describe the actual steps of coronary engagement from a right radial axis. So the first thing is we advance our wire onto the ascending aorta, and there is a technique to get it from descending to ascending in case it falls in the descending. I will describe it later. But anyway, so I advance my wire all the way to the ascending aorta, and you make it loop over that right cusp. It will naturally go to the right, lowermost, or non-coronary lowermost cusp. So the wires advance there. Then over the wire, I advance the Jutkins left catheter. Now, be careful here. The Jutkins left naturally will tend to point outward toward the convexity of the aorta. And if you push that Jutkins left like this, in this orientation, it will tend to pull everything out. The whole system will tend to prolapse out into the aortic arch. So there is finesse in pushing that Jutkins left onto the wire all the way to the coronary cusp. You cannot just shove it. You have to torque it, typically clockwise torque, to make it point from this, make it point to this direction, to the left, and if needed, deep breath, which will elongate and straighten that angle. So there is finesse in pushing that Jutkins. I often see fellows just shoving it in, and then the whole system prolapses out. So you advance while torquing, slightly clockwise torquing. Less than 90, probably less than 45 degrees. And you get it down. So once you get it down to the right cusp, now the next step is to make it jump to the left cusp. So you get it down and you make it look toward the left cusp via, again, a clockwise torque. Now you pull the wire, not all the way, you keep the wire in the body of the catheter. You put it here, then you try to make that catheter jump from the right to the left cusp. And that's the key and probably most important and most difficult step in coronary engagement. I call it the jump. So you pull and make it jump. Now, there is an issue, is sometimes as you're pulling to make it jump, the catheter jumps all the way out, or the catheter flips out on itself. As you're trying to pull from here to here, the catheter flips out on itself and embrace its natural tendency. Okay, so you need to be ready as you're pulling, you need to be proactive. And if you see the catheter starting to prolapse out, you need to immediately reverse and do some torque, as I will show in a little bit. Another idea here is I keep the wire in as I'm doing the jump and as I'm engaging the coronary. Why? Because again, this catheter may prolapse out. So the wire helps, if I prolapse out, the wire helps me get back into the coronary sinuses, the sinuses of Valsalva, I mean. That's one thing. Another thing is that the catheter provides more body to the catheter, and it enhances torqueability of the catheter. Okay, and it you know it smoothens the bends and the tortuosity at this level, which makes it easy to transmit torque. All right, so those are the first two major steps. Now, after we get to the left cusp, then we reach the third step beyond the jump. So we jump to the left cusp and we're looking toward the left. Now we have to actually engage the left coronary. And this is the third step. And there are two third steps, two ways of doing the third steps, 3A and 3B. So 3A is what I call you engage from above. Basically, you pull the catheter and you want it to go right in, with sometimes with a slight manipulation, typically clockwise torque, sometimes counterclock, but typically clockwise. Most of those left coronary manipulation, whether to get down, to point it to the left, is and here to engage, mostly it's a clockwise torque, gentle, mild clockwise torque, often less than 90, but often less than 45 degrees. So that's one technique, to pull with sometimes with a clockwise torque and get in the left main. And if a clockwise makes you want to prolapse out or look the other way, then you're ready to immediately reverse your torque, okay, to counterclock. So that's the first technique, what I call engaging from above. The second technique that I commonly use in difficult radial is to engage from below. So once I reach number 2, rather than pull the number 2 catheter to engage, I actually push it. So I push the catheter, I make it loop from below and reach the left main. This is what we call the U technique. It's a better technique when the catheter is unstable and when engagement is difficult. Those techniques, by the way, apply to all catheter, whether you're diagnostic catheter, Jutkins left, Tiger and Jackie, or for guiding catheter during intervention, Ikari left or EBU type, where I usually often favor that technique, the U technique with guiding catheter to get more support. Okay. Let's see. In patients, and here, maybe I'll show it better here. This. So I mentioned earlier what kind of radial is a difficult radial. Those two, and I showed it earlier, there are those two features that indicate your radial procedure is going to be difficult. This sharp bend from the innominate into the ascending aorta, frequently it's a straight line. You know your case is going to be easy from the innominate to the ascending aorta. When it's like this, you know it's going to be difficult. Another thing is how tall that ascending aorta, the distance between the arch and the sinuses of Valsalva. So this is a difficult case. Whenever you have a difficult case, the catheter will tend to fly out. Each time you try to get it down, it will want to fly out. Okay. So because the catheter is under too much tension. So the best technique in those cases is a 3B, the U technique, the engaging from below. Okay, so whenever the catheter is unstable, whenever you have a lot of tortuosity and you're not able to transmit your torque, Whenever you have those sharp bends and you have difficulty getting the catheter down, in all difficult cases with unstable engagement, go for U technique, engagement from below. You push the catheter onto the aortic valve, loop it until it reaches the left coronary ostium. Okay? So I'll start to show some pictures potentially. So this is an illustration of those basic steps here, okay? Those 0, 1, 2, and 3. So here we got the wire onto the right coronary cusp. Then we jump from the right cusp to the left cusp. And you see, this is a simple illustration. You need to get in your brain that jump. Watch it again. See, this is a jump. You need to recognize it. When it jumps, you know you got to the left cusp, okay? See here. This is an illustration of how we are advancing the catheter over the wire of that very first step, number 1. So we have the wire onto the right cusp, and we're advancing the Jutkins left onto that wire into the right cusp. Again, that advancement, this case is easy because this is a straight line. You see, innominate to right cusp, straight line. Unlike this one, this is a straight line, you know, it's going to be easy. But even then, as you're advancing the Jutkins, it wants to go outward. You need to clockwise torque as you're advancing and maybe making deep breath so your catheter looks toward the left side. Its natural propensity is to look toward the right, toward the convexity of the aorta. All right, so we advance it this way. And this is another case where you're advancing it and it shows you more. This is a case where you see how the catheter has a propensity to look outward. If you keep pushing it like this, you may prolapse the whole system in the aortic arch. So as you're advancing here, you need to be clockwise torquing, and again, maybe deep breath as in the prior slide to make it look toward the left side like this. Okay. This is another case here, and you know, I'm illustrating to you how to engage. All those cases are basic cases that kind of dissect the minutiae of how to engage the left coronary. So this is a Jackie catheter. It fell in the right cusp. Let me start here. So this is a Jackie catheter. We advance it over the wire onto the right cusp. Now our goal is to get to the left cusp, then to the left coronary, okay? So here I'm pulling the catheter, and as we're pulling the catheter to jump, notice that that catheter is tending to prolapse out and look toward the opposite direction to the convexity of the aorta. This is a key moment where if you're inexperienced, that catheter will fly out. However, if you're experienced, this is the moment where you immediately reverse torque. So watch it again. So here I'm trying to jump from right to left. It's tending to prolapse out. You immediately reverse torque and we got into the left cusp. So we achieved success. Since we knew it's going to be difficult, the catheter tends to fly out and the angle here is sharp, we decided to engage from below. So we pushed it here from below and we engage it in a U fashion, okay? I want to highlight in the image on the right here, again, that key moment where experience comes in. This here, watch it. The catheter was about to fly out. We immediately reverse torque. That was a key moment. We immediately reverse torque. So if as I was pulling, I had a slight clock torsion on it, I will immediately counterclock to reverse it and prevent that outcome, okay? And get it into the left cusp rather than get it back up into the ascending aorta or the aortic arch. You got it? This is the key moment in every engagement. You need to be wary of every movement of your catheter when you're doing radial procedures, okay? This was done with a Jackie, which is a 4-centimeter arm. I think it would have been easier to do with a shorter Jutkins left 3.5, for example, a shorter arm. It would have been easier to loop. This here is simple picture I want you to recognize. So here we have a catheter, we're giving a puff. When we give that gentle puff, I want you to recognize, where is this catheter? Is it in the right or is it in the left cusp? It's simple. Whenever you see this, you see that ridge here. You see that ridge here? This is the right coronary cusp. You're still in the right coronary cusp. You're not seeing the left coronary yet. So even though the operator may think, oh, I already jumped in the left cusp, if you give a puff and you see this ridge here, and you kind of almost see a delineation of a cusp, a ridge with this cusp, this is the right sinus of Valsalva. You have not jumped yet. You need to jump before you pursue coronary engagement. You need to jump, then engage that left coronary. Okay. This is another illustration. This is a Jutkins left 3.5. We jumped here. We already jumped, okay? We're in the left coronary. We want to get into, we're in the left coronary cusp. Now we want to get into the left coronary artery. We decided here to try to engage from above. So one technique to engage from above, what we did here, look, it's just below it. We pulled with a slight clockwise torque. See how it jumped in? Watch it again. We pulled clockwise torque, it ended it in. Clockwise torque makes the catheter tip point up. And that allowed us to engage here, especially when we were trying to engage from above. We pulled with a slight clock and we got in. Okay, this is another case illustration. Okay, this is a case of a somewhat sharp innominate aorta angle. You want to try to engage from below in those difficult cases, okay? So here, I'll play this video for you. And here, we got in the left cusp and we pushed it to engage from below because of the difficult aorta innominate angle. And we have the wire in, that dark thing. We still have the wire in. It doesn't prolapse out of the catheter, but it stays in to provide robustness and torqueability to this catheter, okay? So we pushed it. This is the same case. We pushed it to engage from below. However, it didn't engage from below. It didn't get to the left coronary artery. So we pulled it a little bit. We gave it a slight torque, and we tried again to push. We tried to give it a different configuration as we're pushing here. So we pushed. It didn't go in. We pull back a little bit to free the catheter. We give it a slight torque, and we tried to push again. It didn't engage. At this point, we decided, okay, we're not able to engage from below. Be versatile. Well, let's go back to trying to engage from above. You can keep changing below, above. You know, you initially decided to go from below, which is the right call because it was a difficult advancement of the catheter. But if that doesn't work, you can try to change and see if this works. So we tried to engage from above. We pulled the catheter with a slight clock and we got in successfully. But there was a critical point as we're pulling here. The catheter was about to fly out. So you have to be wary of that moment, okay? So to loop from below, what catheters do we need? And this is we use shorter arm Jutkins left 3.5, which is also the same catheter we use to engage from above. In terms of guiding catheter, when you're looping from below, contrary to diagnostic catheter, where we use a shorter Jutkins left, the same one we use to engage from above, when you're using guiding catheter, you actually need a longer arm guiding catheter, like Ikari left 4, 4.5, or CLS 4. Or you can use Amplatz left 2. You can use it also, you can also use Tiger and Jackie, but less successful than the above because of their longer 4-centimeter arm. Generally, those looping from below is more successful with 6 French catheter because 6 French catheter is stiffer and makes it easy to push than 5 French, which is flimsier and tends to prolapse and fall onto the right cusp if you try to push it. If you're trying to push here, a 5 French catheter, when it's on the left cusp, a lot of time as you're pushing it to loop, it may fall backward onto the right cusp. Okay. As you're doing coronary engagement manipulation, you need to know, I want to tell you how to position your hands. So this is a sheath. Your hands are both on the catheter, one on the back, one on the front. The back one, which is the right hand, is the most important hand for me as you're clocking or counterclocking. It's next to a rotating stopcock connected to the tubing if you're connected to the tubing. And that's the one that clocks and counterclock, and that hand goes in sync with it. It facilitates the movement of that. So with both hands, you clock, with both hands, you counterclock. As you're advancing and pulling and torquing initially, you have the wire in all the time. So somebody is loosely holding that wire for you. Both your hands are on the catheter, one in the back, one in the front. I will move on to describe guiding catheters. And after I describe guiding catheter, I'm going to give more cases to illustrate engagement with both diagnostic and guiding catheters. But that section is more for advanced fellows and interventional fellows. I often get asked, what catheter length should I use when I'm going with a guiding catheter in relation to the size of my Jutkins catheter? So if I use a Jutkins left 3.5, what guiding catheter size should I use? First, I will answer that very important question that interventional fellow always asks. But first, I want to describe the shape of the guiding catheters. So EBU and kind of similarly XB and CLS are catheter with mainly one band, but that band, unlike the Jutkins left band, is a platform. It's a long secondary curve, which is unlike the point of Jutkins left. That long platform allows that guiding catheter to sit on a stable platform on the opposite aortic wall and provide more support. That's why we need support when we're doing an intervention. That's why that guiding catheter is more supportive than a Jutkins catheter. Those guiding catheters, like the Jutkins left catheter, can be engaged from above and be positioned on the opposite aortic wall, or they can be looped from below and be positioned on the opposite aortic wall, but also on the aortic valve. So that looping from below provide extra support because you have the double support of the valve and the aortic wall. Okay. Now, generally speaking, you can imagine, and I'll explain it a little more later, when you're engaging from above, you need a shorter EBU arm than when you're engaging from below, where you need a longer arm. Simply that when you're engaging from below, of course, you start your tip of the catheter as you're pushing it. Your tip is in the left cusp, but as you push it up, the tip catches the coronary, but the butt, that flat platform, sits on the opposite cusp and the opposite aortic wall. So we really need a longer arm to reach that coronary from the opposite cusp. Okay. So another catheter that I commonly use, so those are the EBU catheter. This is the first one is the EBU catheter, which has one large platform, one large band platform that we call secondary band, but it's long, unlike the point of Jutkins left. Another type of catheter that is used purely from the radial is the Ikari left. The EBU XB-CLS are used in radial and femoral. Ikari left is designed for radial access. What's special about Ikari? It's somewhat similar to CLS. It has that long, nice platform to sit on the opposite aortic wall or on the aortic valve, but it also has that bend, that natural band that is meant to embrace the innominate aortic band. So it has less tendency to jump out into the aortic arch. So that's a great feature of the Ikari left. Another thing about Ikari left, it's a lighter and more slick and hydrophilic catheter. So it's easier to maneuver. It's easier to engage with Ikari left. It's easier to loop from below with Ikari left, in my experience. The downside is that being so slick and light, it's not heavy. So it's less supportive than those catheters. Those catheters tend to have more body, more heaviness to them. So they tend to be harder to maneuver from radial, but more supportive than Ikari left, in my opinion, in my experience. Okay. So those are the catheters. Now I'll elaborate more on the sizes. So this is a Jutkins left 3.5 in this patient. If the general teaching, the general wisdom has always been that when we're using guiding catheter, EBU and CLS, they are more down pointing than the Jutkins left catheter because they don't have that extra tip at the end. They don't have that extra tip at the end. So they tend to be more downward pointing. Therefore, for the same coronary, you need a smaller curve to engage with an EBU than you would need with a Jutkins left. So the general wisdom used to be, if you're using Jutkins left 3.5, you need an EBU that is same size or a little smaller, like EBU Z3 or something that is a quarter or half a size smaller. If you're using Jutkins left 4, you use EBU 3.5, EBU 3.75. That idea applies mainly for femoral access and mainly when you're engaging from above, to use same size or a little bit smaller. Conversely, from a radial, because I tend to want to loop them and engage from below, I actually think you need a longer size. Contrary to the common teaching, you need a longer EBU and CLS size to engage the coronary from a right radial or left radial. So from a radial access. So because I U-shape, so we need EBU 4 typically. If you're using Jutkins left 3.5, I often use EBU 4 to engage the coronary. Same with Ikari. I often use an Ikari left 4 to engage from below. Okay. Another thing that EBU 4 does and the longer arms do is after you engage from below, you can sometimes pull it back and get that other sort of support, which is the deep engagement coaxial support. So there are the longer arm EBU can give you support in two fashions. One, by allowing you to loop from below and get that extra robust support. Two, after you loop from below, you pull a little bit and the catheter will dive in, and that gives you an extra form of support, which is the coaxial deep engagement. Of course, be careful that you can dissect if you just pull it aggressively. So you have to be careful. But that's another reason why I tend to use EBU 4 for more support. Maybe in simpler cases where I think I can engage from above, I would use the same size. So GL35 diagnostic, EBU 35 from radial for guiding. But for difficult cases, I tend to go with a larger arm. Another thing you have to take into account is, like I said, if you want to deeply dive it, you need the longer arm. Another idea is if you're going LAD or circumflex. In patients with a short left main, you can make your catheter point toward the LAD or the circumflex. If you want to go for the circumflex, you want the catheter to be more down pointing. And to be more down pointing, you need a longer arm. So you even have more compelling reason to use a longer arm if you're going for the circumflex, whether it's femoral or radial. Okay. So I'll give you here a summary. So hopefully you don't get confused. I often use Ikari left 4 or CLS EBU 4 from radial. Okay, assuming I've used a Jutkins left 3.5 to engage, I often use Ikari left 4 or CLS EBU 4 from radial, plus or minus 3.5, 3.75 if I engage from above. Conversely, I often use CLS EBU 3.5, 3.75 when I engage from femoral. So paradoxically, I tend to use longer arms from radial than I do from femoral for guiding catheter, which is the opposite of what we do with diagnostic catheters. This is another idea. How do we measure the 4 anyway? This is Jutkins left 4. It's the distance from here to the tip in a straight line. This is CLS 4 or kind of EBU 4. This is a 4 centimeter from here to the tip. So notice the Jutkins left 4, if you elongate that tip, the length of it from here to the elongated tip is actually more than 4 centimeter. So therefore, a Jutkins left 4, when it's spread out, it's longer than CLS 4. That's another reason for me to, especially when I want support and I'm looping from below, I need a longer CLS, because CLS inherently is shorter than a spread out Jutkins left. Okay, so again, that's another reason why I tend to use a longer CLS EBU catheter. This is the Ikari left shape, by the way. It's a little more bent, the Ikari left at the tip, unlike the CLS and EBU, which have minimal to no bend. EBU has no bend at all. This one has a little bend, nowhere near as sharp as Jutkins though. Okay. And note the platform on the Ikari is larger than the platform on the CLS. that platform that sits on the aortic wall or on the aortic valve. That's another reason that makes the Ikari a more stable catheter in right radial engagement. It has a larger platform. Unfortunately, the lighter weight of the catheter takes away some of its robustness and support, but it's a very friendly catheter. So here to summarize again, how to engage with a guiding catheter. So CLS EBU 3.5 from radial, you get it onto the right cusp initially, you make it jump onto the left cusp. Then when you jump on the left cusp, if you choose to engage from above, you pull with a clockwise torque most often. Sometimes with a counterclock, if you see the catheter is about to fly out, you reverse your clock and you do counterclock and you get in. Sometimes as you're doing this, as you're pulling to engage, the catheter loops on itself. It's a frequent happening with EBU and CLS catheter. So when it loops on itself, don't fret, just advance your wire, which should already be in the catheter, re-advance the wire, and that wire will actually straighten that bend. And sometimes the wire just make you jump right into that left coronary, okay? So those are the technique with CLS to engage and EBU to engage from above. And notice I wrote 3.5 because we don't use the longer arm typically to engage from above, even from radial. Now, CLS EBU to engage from below, I'm picking, look here, I'm picking a longer arm to engage from below. So I'm advancing it, it's tighter, it's harder to maneuver, it's harder to engage from below with CLS and EBU. And that's why I understand why a lot of doctors don't go bigger size. They still use a 3.5 from radial. They don't go bigger size because it's harder. Look how tight this is compared to that. So I go with a bigger one, which is tighter. I get into the left cusp, then I push it to get that extra support. But you do get better support once you get it in, once you're good in this maneuver. And again, you can pull it a little bit to get that deep engagement, coaxial extra support. Okay. So those are here an updated image if you want to save it for you. So for guide catheter, femoral, it's EBU 3.5. For radial, it's Ikari left 4 and EBU 4 or CLS 4. This is some illustration of using guiding catheter for engagement. So this is a CLS 4 catheter. Look how I engage it from below. I pushed it and I engaged from below. Then I pulled a little bit to get that coaxial, a deeper engagement, okay? This is another case, more difficult. Here we've already jumped into the left cusp, okay? So let me start again. So here we're actually, we're starting with the right cusp. I'm trying to pull to get in the left cusp. We did get in the left cusp, then we pushed it. This was tighter because it's longer for this aorta. So it was harder maneuvering, but we did get in eventually. So we started on the right cusp. Notice here in the jump, as we're trying to jump in the left cusp, the catheter is about to fly out. Again, this is always the critical point in radial maneuvering. We immediately reverse torque and we were able to jump successfully in the left cusp and we pushed it. And as we're pushing, sometimes I do slight torque to get it in a better plane, and we got in and we obtained an extra robust support. All right. Now I will move on to another topic. If there are questions, please ask me so I can elaborate on them. Because I will move now to, and you can write them in the chat box. I will move now to a more basic idea. It's actually the idea that precedes number 0 that I described here. But I want you mostly to understand those steps before I get you confused. So before 0 is getting that wire in the ascending aorta in case it doesn't go naturally in the ascending aorta. Most often it will go in the ascending aorta, but sometimes it goes into the descending aorta, as is this case. So what do you do when it goes in the descending aorta? It's always one technique that works, I would say, almost 100%. It's the most predictable success for me is this technique. So your wire gets in the descending aorta. Advance your catheter all the way over it in the descending aorta. Advance it deep in the descending aorta. Okay, here, let it play. Then you pull the catheter with a counterclock maneuver and you will see it jump. Once you see that jump, you know you fell into the ascending aorta. Watch it again. As you're pulling, it jumps. The jump is in the ascending aorta, then it's easy. You push your wire and you loop it on the right coronary sinus of Valsalva, okay? So it's very easy. So there are, I see people struggle with that because they don't know the basic simple technique. That technique, it always takes less than 5 seconds and it always works. Counterclock maneuver. You pull with a counterclock maneuver. There are a couple of reasons for mistakes here. One is the doctor doesn't advance the catheter deep in the descending aorta. In my opinion, you need to advance deep in the descending aorta simply because you don't gauge where the aortic arch is exactly. It's hard to gauge. So you advance it deep so you don't miss the aortic arch and you pull with a counterclock. One mistake they do, they don't advance deep and they start pulling when they are already almost in the innominate. So they start pulling and they get in the innominate without ever getting in the ascending aorta because they started to pull that catheter from way too high. So you need to get it deep and pull the counterclock from somewhat deep. So that's a very important idea. Another caveat sometimes that you're deep and you think you jumped in the ascending aorta and you start advancing the wire while you're still too deep. So wait to see that jump. You know you're ascending, then you advance your wire. Some people use deep engagement, deep breath during this maneuver. I really think you don't need that. It's fine to do it, but just this pull with a counterclock, knowing where your starting point. You're starting from a descending aorta and pulling from deep all the way up, and you will always see that jump. During that maneuver, unlike when we engage, where both my hands are on the catheter to clock and counterclock, for this, as is always the case when my wire manipulation is relevant, my hands both are on the back. So one hand, the left hand is here on the back of the catheter, pulling with a counterclock, while this hand has the wire, it's pulling the wire, then it's ready to re-advance it after the jump. So for this maneuver, as is the case when I'm engaging the left ventricle, my hands are both in the back because those are cases where I need to be very quick in advancing my wire, very ready with advancing my wire with that other hand. Okay. I will show you some more cases of difficult coronary engagement here, okay? Any questions, please, you can interrupt me or you can write them in the chat box, okay? So those are cases of difficult coronary engagement. This is a patient with a very sharp innominate aortic angle, okay? So we're advancing. This is what I always describe. You try to shove that catheter over the wire, the whole system prolapses out. That's not, you need finesse here. So the way you do this, two maneuvers. Deep breath is very important to straighten that angle, and a clockwise torque. So you ask him to take a deep breath and probably hold that deep breath, and you push as he's having the deep breath. So actually, deep breath helps a lot in this, not so much in going from descending to ascending. It helps a lot in this. So with deep breath and with a good clockwise torque, you got it down. Sometimes in this maneuver too, as you're doing this, pulling a little bit on the wire sucks the catheter down. Every action leads to an opposite and equal reaction. So when you pull that wire, sometimes you suck the catheter in. So that's another third maneuver that helps you get that catheter all the way down. So deep breath, clockwise torque, slight pull on that wire, you suck the catheter down. So you suck it, you get it on the right cusp. Again, you have to be imagining in your brain, right and left cusp. Okay, look here, we got it. And we got it looking toward the left. Now, this is only the first step. You still have to jump, then engage. Okay, so we tried to jump here. Okay, we tried to jump, and as we're trying to jump, the catheter is about to fly out. This is a time to rethink quickly. I don't want this catheter to fly out. It wasn't easy at all to get it down. If it flies out, it may be the end here. So rather than risking flying out, on occasion, sometimes you can skip that jump step and you can try to loop the catheter from below, from the right cusp. Ideally, what I would do, I would make a jump, then loop it from below, from the left cusp. Of course, in a difficult case like this, you use the technique 3B, the engagement from below, the U technique. But rather than doing it from the left cusp in a very difficult case, sometimes I try to loop it from the right cusp. And this is what we did here. We pushed it from the right cusp, and we were able to engage and loop it from the right cusp, and it was successful. Okay, so that can work in difficult cases. This is another case of a very sharp innominate aortic angle. Again, if you push, so here if you push, you'll prolapse out, as was happening here. You know, things will prolapse out and everything will jump away from the ascending aorta. So we take a deep breath and we torque, advance the catheter all the way to the aortic valve. Okay. So this is an illustration for if you couldn't understand why deep breath works. Deep breath changes that angle of innominate into ascending aorta. You take a deep breath, you elongate the whole chest and everything inside the chest, all the structure and arterial structure. So that angle becomes, rather than being sharp, it becomes more favorable. Even the aorta becomes longer. So the aorta becomes longer, the angle here becomes more favorable. So another thing that deep breath does, so beside helping you, it helps you get down to the valve. Another thing it does, it helps you engage, because when you take a deep breath, not just the aorta gets elongated, but the left main changes from being superior to being more horizontal. So your catheter, let's say Jutkins left 3.5, which was pointing too much down, now will be able to engage that left main that was pulled down. You got me? So alternatively, so deep breath can help you engage the catheter in cases where that catheter seems to be pointing too much down. Alternatively, in this patient, you could have pulled with a slight clock to engage. You could have tried to push and engage from below, or you could have got Jutkins left 3 to engage. But deep breath is another technique in your arsenal. Okay. And as I explained, during those maneuvers, as you're advancing the catheter and torquing, for that part, both your hands are on the catheter. For coronary engagement, both your hands are on the catheter, where somebody is loosely holding the wire. You need to be also be able to move the wire, because you see here, for example, the wire flies out. So you need to be able to readvance the wire. So that's why I said your assistant is loosely holding the wire and ready to readvance it as needed. And sometimes, as I said, pull it slightly as you're advancing across that band. Pulling it slightly will suck your catheter in. So you need to have also some versatility in your action on that wire. But your hands are on the catheter and somebody is assisting you with that wire. This is another case of difficult coronary engagement, short aorta. Again, from the right cusp, each time, this is a catheter, it's in the right cusp. In your brain, always imagine those, always put them in your brain. So in this case, from the right cusp, each time we try to jump, the catheter will want to fly out. So look at here, it's flying out. So we decided to just try to engage from the right cusp, to push that Jutkins left 3.5, and we were successfully able to loop it from the right cusp. Now, on that same patient, we decided to do PCI. So we got an Ikari left guide, and we tried to do the same thing. This was an Ikari left 3.5. I thought the aorta is too tight, so I didn't want to use Ikari left 4. So I got an Ikari left 3.5, and I tried to do the same technique, push it from the right cusp to engage. I couldn't here. It got stuck against the ridge of the right coronary sinus of Valsalva. So it's important to be versatile. So I decided here to try to jump, which didn't work with Jutkins left. So I decided to pull. You can see how here. So it wasn't working to try to loop it from the right cusp. So I decided to do my regular jump, pull, see if I can jump it. And you will see here, boom, it jumped. You saw that jump? You need to be always, it's a skill early on to recognize the jump. So we were able to jump. Once I jumped, I pushed it. Again, watch the jump. You see it? It's a subtle motion. It's a subtle but abrupt motion. You see it here. So once it jumped, I pushed it and looped it from below. Okay. However, once you looped it from below, it wasn't in. So what do? It's easy when it's not in. You can try to just pull it a little bit to free it, give it a slight torque, and push it back maybe get it in a different plane to get into that coronary. And that's what we did here. We kept pulling a little bit, give it a slight torque, and re-advance it, and we got in. Okay. I want to keep going for about 10 minutes, okay? I hope you can stay with me here. I will show some really important tip for diagnostic as well as interventional, more advanced fellows. So this is a basic idea. Unfortunately, I quiz fellow that, and they don't often give me the right answer. When you see this catheter, this is from a femoral axis, from any axis, you see a catheter looking like this, and I'll tell you it didn't engage the left coronary. This is a still frame. You don't need contrast injection. Just by looking at that catheter, and I tell you I couldn't engage, what's the immediate next step to engage the coronary artery, the left coronary artery here? Think about it and give me the answer. What's the immediate next step when you see this catheter? How to engage the left coronary? You should know, you see this shape, it's an elongated catheter with a tip pointing down. You need a shorter arm. You don't need contrast. You immediately know you need a shorter arm. But here I'll show you with contrast if you don't believe me. So look, it's looking, you inject contrast, it's pointing down below the coronary. You need a shorter arm. So without contrast, just by looking at it, I immediately know I need a shorter arm. And here we got Jutkins left 3.5, and we successfully engage with the Jutkins left 3.5. So compare this shorter arm to that. This is elongated pointing down. This is pointing appropriately. And again, it's that idea. Please memorize that slide. Extremely important slide. We use it all day, every day. You have an elongated catheter pointing down. You need to go smaller. Jutkins left 3.5. You need to have a shortened catheter falling down on the valve with its tip pointing up. You need a longer arm. So this one, you need a Jutkins left 3.5. That one, you need a Jutkins left 5. You need to go bigger. Please memorize that slide. Extremely important. Frame it in your room. Please, very important. Okay, this is another example here. This is a catheter falling down. So very easy. What's the next step? JL4, you need JL5. Okay. This is a case I did last week. It's a patient with a 6.5 centimeter aorta, very large aorta from a right radial. So this is Jutkins left 5, actually. And look, even Jutkins left 5 is falling down with its tip pointing up. So I use what I rarely use, which is Jutkins left 6, and I was able to successfully engage. So longer arm in this falling catheter with its tip pointing up. Okay. I will go to the last idea of the day, which is also an important idea, common situation. In patients with either separate left circ LAD ostia or with short left main, you may have a catheter that falls into one of them. Okay, let's take the scenario where the catheter, this is Jutkins left 3.5, let's say, it's falling into the left circumflex. How do I get from the left circumflex to the LAD? Please don't do those non-selective shots. So as I'm injecting the left circ, you know, you can see some filling of the LAD, and a lot of doctors will be okay with that. But I'm a perfectionist. I would hate that. You need to get good selective view of the LAD. Don't get that shadow filling of the LAD when your catheter is selective in the circumflex. You need to selectively engage the LAD and get proper images of that LAD. So how do you go from the left circumflex to the LAD? Okay, there are several techniques, and I hope you know them. One technique could be to pull out, give the catheter a clock torque, because a clock torque makes the catheter point more up, and the LAD is more up compared to the circ, which is down. So you can pull, do a little clock, and engage. Sometimes you can pull and do counter clock and engage. Those frequently don't work, especially in radial, because when you pull and torque, sometimes the whole system flies out. But this is one technique. The two best techniques are those. So when your Jutkins left 3.5 is in the circumflex, two ways of making it go in the LAD. The one I want the fellows to always answer me when I ask them in the cath lab how to go the LAD is this. LAD is more upward pointing, therefore you need a shorter catheter. So if you're using Jutkins left 3.5, get a Jutkins left 3, and it will tend to go in the LAD. That's the single best answer. So if you remember one out of the 5 I will explain, remember that one. Shorter catheter gets you from circ to the LAD. Longer catheter gets you from LAD to the circ, okay? That's the single most important technique. Another technique that I like is if you're in the circ and you want to go to the LAD, and if you're engaging from above, the 3A technique, well, all you can do here is pull out a little bit, then push and loop from below. Okay, do the U engagement, because engaging from below makes the catheter point more up. So you'll end up in the LAD. Now, if you're already looped from below and you're in the circumflex, then that technique is not going to help you much. But if you're engaged from above and you're in the circ, disengage and engage from below, and you're likely to fall into the LAD. I love this technique in that scenario. So those are the 2 best techniques. But there are 5 techniques, and I really want you to know those. Honestly, it's a really big issue we encounter every day, especially in interventions where you want your catheter to be sometimes selective and provide you robust selective support. Okay, so those are the 5 techniques. So one, like I said, slightly disengage, then push the catheter to engage from above, from below, if you are engaging from above to start with. I love this one. The second technique, it doesn't often work, which is to slightly pull the catheter and then clock and re-engage as a clock makes the catheter tip point up. You can counterclock, because here's the thing, LAD is more upward pointing, but LAD is also in a horizontal plane, LAD is more anterior than the circ. So the circ is more posterior, LAD is more anterior, more looking toward us. And counterclock points the catheter, the Jutkins catheter, more anteriorly. Unlike the Jutkins right, where clock is what points it to this direction, counterclock points the Jutkins left to that direction. So you can try, but look, my experience, despite all the nice theory, those 2 often don't work, neither counter nor clock. So number 3, the most important one, is to switch to a smaller Jutkins left to point more up. Number 4, and I want you to know that, is taking deep breath. And number 5 is try Amplatz left. And I will elaborate on that in a little bit. Okay. So here's the thing, deep breath. Deep breath can work. Why? I explained it. Deep breath elongates the chest, and it makes your left main more horizontal. And in case of separate ostia or short left main, it will also make your LAD more downward and more horizontal. So if that Jutkins left 3.5 was pointing in the circ, now I take a deep breath, I pull the LAD down, and now the LAD is more down, so that downward pointing catheter will end up hooking the LAD. So deep breath can work. So we ask the patient, take a deep breath and hold it, and you try to engage in that maneuver. Conversely, you can do the opposite. If you're in the LAD with your catheter and you want to get in the circ, you can do deep exhalation, deep expiration, and ask the patient to hold his breath in deep expiration and try to engage the circumflex in that manner. There is a catch. Deep breathing during that step in radial can make your catheters fly out. Okay, those catheters tend to be unstable, and taking deep breath can make them fly out and prolapse in the ascending aorta. So that's why it doesn't always work. Or if you engage it while the patient is taking deep breath, then when he exhales his deep breath, well, your catheter may fly out. So that's one problem, keep in mind, with using deep breath. But that's a technique. Understand that anatomy. So deep breath can work, or deep exhalation if you want to go into the circumflex. This is a case here that I did also last week. So the catheter, this is Jutkins left 3.5. It's going in the LAD. Now, this is a more difficult situation. It's a totally separate ostia. The circumflex is totally separate. There is absolutely no left main. It's not a short left main, which is more commonly the case. It's no left main. And I have a Jutkins left 3.5 in the LAD. It's kind of, in my opinion, often harder to go from LAD to circ than to go from circ to LAD. Because from circ to LAD, you often can use that technique of looping more upward. Anyway, so we're in the LAD with a Jutkins left 3.5. We took our LAD pictures, but I wanted to selectively engage the circ. So I tried to pull the catheter and do slight counterclock and clock. It didn't work. The catheter will fly out every time I try to do that. Okay. That's the downside of radial. Those pulling and trying to do clock and counterclock to get into the other vessel works more from femoral in selective engagement than from radial, in my experience. Again, because radial with a breath, and when you disengage, you may fly out. So anyway, so we tried the best technique, which is we went from Jutkins left 3.5. I tried a Jutkins left 4. It didn't work. It still went in the LAD. I tried Jutkins left 5. It didn't work. Still went in the LAD. I try again the breathing maneuvers, the clock, counterclock. None of it works. So what should I do here? Whenever you have a hard time in interventional cardiology in general, your immediate next thought should always be, in my opinion, Amplatz left. It works in anomalous coronary. It works in difficult coronary engagement of any sort. Amplatz left. And this is the fifth possible maneuver to go from circ to LAD or LAD to circ, is to use an Amplatz left. So that's what I did. I got an Amplatz left 1, which you can see here, nicely and selectively engage that codominant left circumflex. So here is about Amplatz left. So when you want to go in the circ, you want it to point down, and Amplatz, unlike Jutkins left, to point down. With Jutkins left to point down, you need a larger arm, as I showed here. To point the catheter down, more down, you need a larger arm. Whereas with Amplatz left, to point down, you need a shorter arm. So that's why I use an Amplatz left 1. If I wanted to aim from circ to LAD, I would have used Amplatz left 2 or maybe even 3. But to point from LAD to circ, I use an Amplatz left 1, which happens to be an excellent selective guide for difficult left circumflex intervention, Amplatz left 1 or 1.5, okay? So I will tell you what is Amplatz left. I'll use this opportunity to describe one of my absolute most important catheters, Amplatz left. So it's a catheter that has a duck shape and that has a big butt. It's really the most important feature of that catheter, the big butt, which sits on the aortic valve and on the opposite aortic wall. That's the genius of that catheter, that very large butt, which provides you a very large surface of contact with the aortic valve and a very robust support. Okay. It comes in different sizes. All Amplatz left have that same big butt, but Amplatz left 1, 2, 3 is the distance between the tip here and the center of that butt. So you can have Amplatz left 1 versus 2 versus 3 longer. Okay. Normally, again, the smaller the Amplatz left, the more it points down. The longer the Amplatz left, the more it will point up. So I generally use Amplatz left 2 for the left coronary in general. If I want to go selective circ, it's Amplatz left 1 or 1.5. And the beauty of Amplatz left is that it's a great right coronary catheter. But for the right coronary, I would use Amplatz left 1 or smaller, 0.75. Okay. So Amplatz left is great for all coronaries, right, left, for grafts, and for anomalous coronaries. Okay, it is actually my favorite right. So Amplatz left is my favorite right coronary guide from a radial axis, as I will elaborate in the next session. I just want to mention a last thing is the Amplatz right. Okay, there is an Amplatz right, not as good of a catheter. It has the same duck shape, but the main difference, it has a very small butt. So it doesn't sit on the aortic valve. It's good to engage the right coronary. It doesn't provide great support. It's a nice catheter. It handles very nicely. It's easy to engage the right coronary with it. It's actually easier to engage the right coronary with this than with a Jutkins right. So a lot of doctors use it. You can use Amplatz right 1 or Amplatz right 2, which has that longer tip. Okay. And as opposed to the Amplatz left, no big butt, and it tends to be more downward pointing than Amplatz left. I will stop here. Any questions? Well,